My foster parents tried erasing my past, but didn't know my brother had been contacting me. I was standing in my foster parents' bedroom at 11:43 p.m., holding a box labeled, "Dylan, do not open," that I'd found behind the false panel in their closet, when I heard the garage door open downstairs. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the stack of unopened letters, 23 of them, all addressed to me in my brother's handwriting, all postmarked over the last 2 years. Every single one marked, "Return to sender," in my foster mother's neat cursive. Beneath the letters were my parents' wedding album, my baby book, my brother Ethan's high school graduation photos, and a folder containing what looked like legal documents with sections highlighted in yellow. The garage door slammed. I had maybe 90 seconds before they came upstairs and found me holding proof that my entire life here had been built on lies. I'd been living with Richard and Carolyn Donovan for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that I was counting, but when you're 17 and suddenly without biological parents, you become hyper-aware of time. My mom and dad died in a carbon monoxide leak in our home when I was 15. That much I knew for certain. What I didn't know, what nobody had bothered to tell me clearly, was that I had options for where to go afterward. My brother Ethan was 21 at the time, in his senior year of college. According to the Donovans, he'd signed away his rights to custody, said he couldn't handle raising a teenager while finishing school. They made it sound like he'd abandoned me without a second thought, chose his degree over his own brother. For 2 years, I'd carried that weight, that belief that Ethan hadn't wanted me. The letters in my hands, still sealed, told a different story entirely. The Donovans had seemed perfect at first. They were the kind of foster parents CPS dreams about finding: upper middle class, stable jobs, a huge house in the suburbs with a pool. Richard worked in pharmaceutical sales, pulled in 6 figures. Carolyn was a guidance counselor at the local high school. Not mine, thankfully. But she brought home that professional warmth that made you feel heard. They'd fostered 3 other kids before me, all successfully transitioned to independence or reunification. They had references, certificates, glowing testimonials. I remember my caseworker, a perpetually exhausted woman named Linda Nguyen, telling me I'd won the lottery with this placement. Their house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry. They gave me my own room, helped me pick out new furniture, told me to treat their home as mine. For the first few months, I actually believed I might be okay. The weird things started small, easy to rationalize. About a month in, I asked Carolyn if she had my parents' contact information for extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I knew existed, but couldn't quite remember. She'd smiled that practiced smile and said most of the family had drifted apart after the funeral, that it might be healthier for me to focus forward rather than backward. When I pressed, said I just wanted to send a card to my dad's sister for Christmas, she told me she'd look into it and never brought it up again. I told myself she was busy. Guidance counselors work insane hours. Then there was my phone. My old phone had died, truly died, wouldn't charge, screen completely black, about 6 weeks into the placement. Richard bought me a new one, top of the line, said it was an early Christmas present. Sweet gesture. But the number was different. When I asked if we could transfer my old number, he said it wasn't possible with my old carrier, something about account access and my parents' estate still being in probate. It seemed reasonable enough. I didn't know who I'd be getting calls from anyway. The first real red flag came at month 4, the week before my 16th birthday. I came home from school to find Carolyn in my room, reorganizing my closet. Not snooping, she explained, just helping me make space, since I'd accumulated so much new stuff. But she'd taken down the corkboard above my desk, the one where I'd pinned photos of my parents, a ticket stub from a concert Ethan had taken me to, my dad's old baseball cap hanging from a pushpin. Everything was gone. When I asked where it was, she looked genuinely confused, said she'd put it in a memory box in the garage so it wouldn't get damaged, that dwelling on the past wasn't healthy for grief processing. She'd read studies. She had a degree in counseling. She knew about these things. I found myself nodding, accepting it, even though something in my gut twisted. That night, I went to the garage to find the box. There were 53 boxes in that garage, none of them labeled. I gave up after 20 minutes. What I didn't know then was that my brother had been trying to reach me since week 1. Ethan told me later, much later after everything exploded, that he'd called my old number 67 times in the first month before realizing it was disconnected. He'd sent letters to the Donovan's address, letters I never received. He'd contacted Linda Nguyen, my caseworker, who told him that I needed space to adjust, that he should respect the foster family's boundaries and try again in 6 months. He'd shown up at the house twice. The first time, nobody answered even though cars were in the driveway. The second time, Richard answered and told him I'd specifically requested no contact, that seeing him was triggering painful memories and undermining my therapy progress. Ethan, who knew me better than anyone, who knew I'd never say that, was told by a licensed foster parent that his presence was harmful to my mental health. What was he supposed to do? He backed off, but he didn't stop trying. Around month 7, something changed. I was checking my email, the new email address the Donovans had set up for me, since my old one was apparently compromised by spam, when I noticed a message in my spam folder. The subject line was just E. I almost deleted it, assumed it was junk, but something made me click. The message was blank except for a link to a private YouTube video titled, "For My Brother." My heart stopped. I knew immediately it was from Ethan. I clicked the link on my phone, headphones in, door locked. His face filled the screen, older than I remembered, tired, but still him, still my brother. He spoke for 3 minutes, told me he'd been trying to reach me, asked if I was okay, said he'd finished school, had a job now, a stable apartment, and wanted to file for custody modification. He gave me a new number to text, said to be careful, said something didn't feel right about the situation. The video ended with, "If you get this, text me 17, so I know it's really you." 17 was our dad's Jersey number. Nobody else would know that. I sat on my bed for 20 minutes, phone burning in my hands, before I texted the number. Just 17. The response came in 8 seconds. "Thank God. Don't call. They might be monitoring. I'm working on getting you out. Delete everything. I'll contact you again soon. I love you." I deleted the text thread, deleted the email, cleared my browser history, and lay awake until 4 a.m., wondering if I'd imagined the entire thing. But I hadn't. 3 days later, another email, another private video. This time, Ethan explained what he'd learned, that he'd never signed away custody rights, that he'd been explicitly blocked from information about my placement, that the Donovans had told CPS he was unstable and potentially dangerous. He'd hired a lawyer, a woman named Jennifer Okafor, specializing in family reunification cases. They were building a case, but they needed time. He needed me to stay quiet, stay safe, and wait. For 6 months, we communicated through those private YouTube videos. Ethan would post them unlisted, send the links through burner email addresses that changed every few weeks. I'd watch them late at night, memorize everything, delete all traces. He told me about his life, his job as a software developer, his small apartment in the city, the guest room he was setting up for me. He asked careful questions about the Donovans, never anything that would make me suspicious if someone was reading my responses, but enough to build a picture. Did they control my schedule? Yes, heavily. Did I have access to my own documents, social security card, birth certificate? No, they kept everything safe. Did they monitor my communications? I wasn't sure, but probably. Did I feel safe? That was the question that broke me. I didn't know how to answer it. They'd never hurt me physically. They fed me well, bought me things, took me to therapy appointments. But I felt erased, like I was being slowly rewritten into a different person, a person with no history before the Donovans, no family, no past worth remembering. The breaking point came on a Friday night in October, 3 weeks before my 17th birthday. The Donovans had gone to dinner with friends, wouldn't be back until midnight. I'd told them I had homework, wanted to stay home. In reality, I'd planned this for weeks. Ethan's last video had mentioned something about legal documents the Donovans might be hiding, specifically modification paperwork or communication records. He suggested, carefully, that if I ever had private access to their personal spaces, certain information might be useful for the court case. I wasn't stupid. I knew he was asking me to snoop. I knew it was a violation of their privacy, their trust. I also knew that I needed to understand what was being hidden from me, what they'd been doing for 2 years while I thought my brother had abandoned me. I started in Richard's office. His desk was surprisingly organized. Color-coded folders, labeled drawers, a filing system that would make a librarian weep with joy. I found tax returns, insurance policies, investment statements, but nothing about me. The filing cabinet was locked. I spent 15 minutes with a bobby pin and a YouTube tutorial before the drawer clicked open. Inside, third folder from the back, Dylan Foster case. My hands were steady as I pulled it out. They shouldn't have been. Inside were copies of every communication Ethan had sent for 2 years. Every letter, printed and stamped, returned to sender. Every email to Lyndon Nguyen with her responses. Every legal notice from Jennifer Okafor, the lawyer, and paperwork I didn't understand at first. Something about a petition for adoption, filed 6 months ago, pending my 18th birthday. They were trying to adopt me, legally sever any remaining connection to my biological family, make me theirs permanently. The petition listed reasons. Child has no viable family connections. Biological sibling unable to provide stable home. Child has expressed desire to remain with foster family permanently. I had never expressed that. Not once. Not ever. But there were documents supporting their claims, Albro therapy notes from Dr. Raymond Cross, the therapist they'd set me up with, summarizing sessions where I'd allegedly talked about feeling more secure with the Donovans and ambivalent about reconnecting with extended family. I remembered those sessions differently. I talked about missing my parents, about the hole Ethan's absence left. But the notes were clinical, sterile, interpreted through whatever lens the Donovans had asked Dr. Cross to use. There were also letters of recommendation, from their neighbors, from Carolyn's colleagues, from families whose children they'd previously fostered, all glowing, all describing the Donovans as selfless, devoted, the ideal parents for a traumatized teenager. I took photos of everything with my phone, hands shaking now, breath coming fast. I put the folder back exactly as I found it, relocked the drawer, and went upstairs. I needed more. I needed to know how deep this went. Their bedroom felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but I was already so far over that line it didn't matter anymore. I checked the obvious places first, nightstands, dresser drawers, the closet. Nothing. Then I remembered something from a movie, some thriller where people hide things in closets behind false walls. I started pressing on panels, feeling stupid, feeling desperate. And then one moved. A small section of the back wall, barely noticeable, pushed inward to reveal a shallow space. Inside was a cardboard box, and inside that box was my entire past. 23 letters from Ethan. I opened one, just one, hands trembling. It was dated 3 months after I'd been placed. His handwriting was messy, rushed. Dylan, I don't know if you're getting these, but I have to keep trying. I finished my finals. I got a job, real job, good salary, benefits. I found an apartment with 2 bedrooms. I'm ready. I can take care of you now. Please write back. Please let me know you're okay. I miss you so much it physically hurts. Love, your brother. I folded it carefully, slid it back into the envelope. 22 more, all saying similar things, all begging me to respond. All returned to sender. Beneath the letters were my parents' wedding album, my baby book, filled with my mother's handwriting documenting my first words, first steps, first everything. Photos I'd never seen, me as a toddler with Ethan, both of us covered in mud, laughing. My dad teaching me to ride a bike, my mom reading to me before bed. Things I'd asked about, been told were lost in the estate settlement, or accidentally thrown away by distant relatives who'd cleaned out the house. All here, all deliberately hidden. There was also a journal, my mother's journal from the year I was born. I flipped through pages of her thoughts, her fears about being a good parent, her joy at watching me grow. On the last page, she'd written, Ethan is so good with Dylan. Even at 7, he's so protective, so loving. These boys are going to take care of each other when they're grown. I know it. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. A folder of legal documents, the original custody evaluation from when my parents died, recommending placement with Ethan if he could demonstrate stability within 6 months. A letter from Ethan to CPS, written 2 months after I was placed, explaining he'd found stable housing and employment and wanted to revisit custody. A response from the Donovans' lawyer, they had a lawyer involved from the start, arguing that removing me from their care now would be traumatic and destabilizing, citing attachment formed with foster family and regression in emotional progress. There were progress reports I'd never seen, written by Carolyn, describing my adjustment in glowing terms while subtly suggesting that any mention of Ethan caused me distress. It was all lies, but it was documented lies, official lies, the kind that held weight in court. And at the bottom, a document that made my blood stop, a payment receipt. The Donovans had paid someone, a case consultant named Maurice Blackwell, $15,000 for placement advocacy services. The date was 1 week before I'd been placed with them. Below it, an email exchange between Richard and Blackwell, discussing placement strategy and minimizing biological family interference. One line stood out. The brother is the primary obstacle. If we can establish him as unstable or disinterested, the placement becomes permanent by default once the child reaches 18. They'd planned this from the beginning. Every blocked letter, every returned call, every lie about Ethan not wanting me. It was all strategic, calculated, a systematic erasure designed to make me theirs. That's when I heard the garage door. I'd lost track of time. It was 11:43 p.m. They were home early, and I was in their bedroom holding a box full of evidence that they'd been systematically erasing my identity and blocking my brother's attempts to reunify with me. I heard Carolyn's voice downstairs. I'll just run up and check on Dylan, make sure he's asleep. Footsteps on the stairs. I had seconds. I couldn't put everything back in time. I couldn't run without them seeing me leave their room. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stood there, box in my hands, and waited for her to open the door. The look on her face when she saw me wasn't shock. It was resignation, like she'd known this moment would come eventually, had maybe even prepared for it. Dylan, she said quietly, her guidance counselor voice activating automatically. Let's talk about this downstairs. Richard appeared behind her, took in the scene with one sweep of his eyes. His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. Put the box down, he said. Not a request. I pulled out my phone instead, held it up so they could see the screen. I've already photographed everything, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. It's uploaded to cloud storage. If anything happens to me, if this phone disappears, my brother gets copies of every document in this box. I was bluffing. I hadn't uploaded anything yet, but they didn't know that. Carolyn's face crumpled. You don't understand, she whispered. We were protecting you. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. We moved to the living room at my insistence. Neutral territory, doors unlocked. I wanted to be able to run if I needed to. They didn't try to take the box from me. Richard poured himself a drink. Carolyn cried. And slowly, piece by piece, they told me their version of events. They'd wanted a child of their own for years, she explained. Multiple rounds of IVF, all failures. 3 miscarriages. Thousands of dollars spent, hopes raised and crushed over and over. They'd turned to fostering, hoping to adopt eventually, but every placement had ended in reunification, or the child aging out. Then I came along, traumatized, grieving, with a brother who was barely an adult himself, drowning in student debt and living in a dorm room. They'd seen an opportunity. Not malicious, Carolyn insisted. Loving. They genuinely believed Ethan couldn't provide the stability I needed, that they could give me a better life. So they'd done everything they could to make sure I stayed. Richard was more direct. We knew if Ethan stayed in your life, you'd eventually choose him. Blood is blood. We couldn't compete with that. So we had to make sure the competition didn't exist. He said it like it was reasonable, like cutting my brother out of my life was a logical business decision. Maurice helped us understand how the system works, he continued. How placements become permanent, what language to use in reports, which levers to pull. It's not illegal. It's advocacy. You paid someone $15,000 to help you steal a kid, I said, voice flat. That's not advocacy. That's trafficking. Carolyn flinched. Don't say that. We love you. Everything we did was because we love you. You love the idea of me, I countered. The version of me that doesn't have a past, doesn't have a family, doesn't have anyone but you. You erased my brother because he reminded you I wasn't really yours. You hid my parents' things because they proved I existed before you. You didn't love me. You loved the blank slate you were trying to turn me into. The words hung in the air. Carolyn was crying harder now, mascara running down her cheeks. Richard's jaw was tight, his knuckles white around his glass. What do you want? He finally asked. What would it take for you to forget about this? We can contact Ethan, arrange visits. We can return everything in that box. We'll withdraw the adoption petition. Just out, please. Don't destroy our lives over this. I almost laughed. You want me to protect you? After 2 years of lies? After blocking every attempt my brother made to reach me? After making me believe he didn't want me? I shook my head. I don't want anything from you except to leave. Tonight. And I want you to know that everything you did, every letter you returned, every lie you told, every document you hid, it's going to come out. My brother has a lawyer. CPS is going to investigate. And whatever happens to you after that, you earned it. At 2:34 a.m., I excused myself to use the bathroom and texted Ethan from the burner number he'd given me. They know. I have evidence. Need extraction. His response came while I was still staring at the screen. Address? I'm coming now. Do not leave that bathroom until I text you I'm outside. If you feel unsafe, call 911 immediately. I sent him the address, then splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked the same as I had 4 hours ago, but I felt like a different person. I'd spent 2 years grieving the loss of my brother while he'd been fighting for me. I'd let strangers convince me I was unwanted while my real family was being systematically blocked from reaching me. The grief turned to anger, hot and bright in my chest. I dried my face, opened the bathroom door, and walked back into the living room where the Donovans sat on their expensive couch in their perfect house built on lies. I want to leave, I said. No preamble, no explanation. Carolyn looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Dylan, please, just listen up. I've been listening for 2 years, I interrupted. Every time you told me Ethan didn't want me. Every time you redirected conversations about my family. Every time you lost something I asked about or couldn't find information I needed. I listened to all of it. I believed you. Richard stood, hands up in a placating gesture. You're emotional right now, understandably. Let's all get some rest and talk about this in the morning with clear heads. No. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it, but I knew. Ethan was outside. I'm leaving with my brother. Tonight. You can cooperate, or I can call the police and CPS and explain what I found in your bedroom. You're a minor, Richard said, his voice hardening again. Legally, you can't just leave. We're your legal guardians until The doorbell rang. All 3 of us froze. Then I moved, faster than either of them, crossing the living room and yanking open the front door. Ethan stood on the porch, and the sight of him, really him, not just on a screen, broke something open in my chest. He was taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, with the same dark hair and sharp cheekbones we'd inherited from our dad. But his eyes were different. Older. Tired. Full of relief so intense it looked like pain. Dylan, he breathed. Then I was hugging him, actually hugging my brother for the first time in 2 years, and I didn't realize I was crying until I felt wetness on his shirt. He held me tight, one hand on the back of my head like he used to when I was little and had nightmares. I've got you, he murmured. I'm here. I've got you. Over my shoulder, he addressed the Donovans. I'm Ethan Reeves, Dylan's brother. I'm taking him with me tonight. Tomorrow my attorney will contact CPS to initiate emergency removal proceedings and file formal complaints about your conduct during this placement. If you attempt to prevent us from leaving or contact Dylan without supervision, we'll add unlawful restraint charges to the complaint. His voice was calm, professional, nothing like the emotional wreck they'd probably described to CPS. Richard took a step forward. You can't just, Ethan pulled out his phone, swiped to a recording app. This conversation is being recorded. Would you like to finish that sentence? Silence. Carolyn was still crying on the couch. We love him, she said weakly. Ethan's face didn't change. No, you don't. You don't erase someone you love. Now Dylan's going to pack a bag. You're going to stay here in this room. If you attempt to stop him or enter his room, I will call the police. Do you understand? I packed in 10 minutes. Clothes, laptop, the few photos I had left, my parents' wedding album from the box, my mother's journal. Everything else, the expensive furniture, the designer clothes, the top-of-the-line phone, I left behind. None of it mattered. Ethan waited outside my room the entire time, physically blocking the hallway. The Donovans didn't try to stop us. As we walked out the front door, Carolyn called out one last time, "Dylan, please, you're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're giving up." I turned back to look at her. "You're right," I said. "I don't understand how you could do this and think you were helping. But I'm done trying to understand. I'm going home." Ethan's hand was steady on my shoulder as we walked to his car, a practical sedan, nothing flashy, but clean and well-maintained. He put my bag in the trunk, opened the passenger door for me, and then we were pulling away from the house where I'd spent 2 years becoming someone I wasn't. The drive to his apartment took 43 minutes. We didn't talk much at first. He asked if I was okay, if they'd hurt me. I said no, not physically. He asked if I needed food, water. I said I just needed a minute to process. He handed me his phone, told me to put on any music I wanted, said we didn't have to talk until I was ready. I scrolled through his playlists and found one titled, "For When Dylan Comes Home." It was full of songs we'd listened to together before our parents died, classic rock our dad had loved, the indie bands Ethan had introduced me to, even the embarrassing pop songs I'd been obsessed with at 14. I pressed play, and Everlong by Foo Fighters filled the car, and something in my chest that had been locked tight for 2 years finally loosened. "You kept a playlist for me?" I said, voice rough. Ethan glanced over, smiled. "I kept a lot of things for you. I never stopped believing I'd get you back." His apartment was small but warm. The guest room he'd mentioned in the videos was real. A full-size bed, a desk, bookshelves waiting to be filled, posters still in protective plastic leaning against the wall. "I didn't know what you'd want," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "So I bought a bunch of options. We can decorate however you like. Make it actually yours." I sat on the bed, felt the weight of the last 4 hours finally hitting me. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked. "In the videos. Why didn't you just tell me to run?" Ethan sat beside me, careful not to crowd my space. "Because I needed everything legal and airtight. If you'd run and they'd reported you missing, it would have complicated the custody case. They could have painted me as unstable, you as a runaway, themselves as victims. I needed documentation, evidence, a real case. I needed to make sure that when I got you out, you stayed out." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "I'm so sorry I couldn't do it faster. Every day you were there, not knowing I was fighting for you, it killed me. But I couldn't risk losing you permanently by moving too fast." We stayed up until dawn. He made coffee. I'd started drinking it sometime in the last 2 years, he didn't know. And we talked. I told him everything. The small erosions of my past, the redirections, the feeling of being slowly rewritten. He told me about the legal battle, how he'd gone to 3 lawyers before finding Jennifer Okafor, who'd taken one look at his case and agreed to payment plans because she'd seen this pattern before. Foster families who fell in love with the idea of a child and convinced themselves they were entitled to keep them. How she'd filed motions, contacted CPS repeatedly, been stonewalled by bureaucracy and the Donovans' clean record. How they'd finally gotten a court date for next month, a custody modification hearing where Ethan would have formally presented his case. How finding the payment to Maurice Blackwell changed everything, gave them concrete evidence of manipulation rather than just conflicting narratives. "Jennifer's going to want to meet you first thing Monday," Ethan said, refilling my coffee. "She'll need to document everything while it's fresh. Your testimony, the documents you found, the timeline of how they isolated you. It's going to be intense, Dylan. CPS investigations, possibly police involvement, media attention. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the box still sitting in my bag, about the letters from Ethan I'd never received, about my mother's journal hidden for 2 years. "I'm ready," I said. "If it means other kids don't go through this, if it means the Donovans can't do this to someone else, I'm ready." On Monday morning, Jennifer Okafor arrived at Ethan's apartment at 8 a.m. sharp. She was younger than I expected, early 30s maybe, with short natural hair and an intensity that made the small space feel charged. "Dylan," she said, shaking my hand like I was an adult, not a 17-year-old kid in borrowed clothes. "I'm Jennifer. I've been working on your case for 11 months. I need you to tell me everything that happened Friday night, in as much detail as you can remember. We're filing an emergency removal order with CPS this morning, but we need your testimony documented before the Donovans can control the narrative." For 3 hours, she interviewed me. What I'd found, when I'd found it, how the Donovans had reacted. She recorded everything, had me sign statements, photographed the documents I'd taken. "This is good," she said finally. "This is very good. The adoption petition alone would have been enough to raise questions, but combined with the payment to Blackwell and the evidence of blocked communication, we have a case for fraudulent placement practices and potential corruption in the foster system." She explained the next steps. Emergency removal hearing within 72 hours to formalize my placement with Ethan. Full investigation by CPS, likely involving interviews with Lyndon Nguyen and anyone else involved in my case. review of the Donovans' other placements to ensure no other children were being isolated from biological families, and potentially criminal charges. The payment to Blackwell is the key, Jennifer explained. If we can prove he was running an illegal adoption facilitation scheme, that opens up conspiracy charges, fraud, maybe even child trafficking, depending on how many families he worked with. How many do you think there are? I asked. Jennifer's expression was grim. Based on what I've seen, dozens, maybe more. Blackwell's been operating for at least a decade. He targets desperate families who want to adopt but can't go through traditional channels or are too old, too many previous placements, failed home studies. He connects them with vulnerable foster children, then coaches them on how to block biological families and fast-track adoptions. It's sophisticated, legal enough to avoid scrutiny, but unethical as hell. By Wednesday, CPS had opened an investigation. Lyndon Nguyen, my original caseworker, was suspended pending review. The director of the regional CPS office, a man named Thomas Ashford, personally called Ethan to apologize and assure him that my case would be thoroughly reviewed. Maurice Blackwell was under investigation for running an illegal adoption facilitation scheme. Turns out the Donovans weren't his only clients. He'd been connecting desperate would-be parents with vulnerable foster children for years, coaching families on how to block biological relatives and fast-track adoptions. The Donovans had their foster license immediately revoked. 2 other children in their care, kids I'd never met, placed after I was, were removed and placed elsewhere. One of those kids was a 13-year-old girl named Alexis. She'd been with the Donovans for 8 months when she was removed. When Jennifer interviewed her as part of the investigation, Alexis described the same patterns: blocked communication with her older sister, documents mysteriously lost, therapy sessions where the therapist seemed more interested in assessing her attachment to the Donovans than her actual mental health. Her sister, Brianna, had been trying to gain custody for months, blocked at every turn by the same arguments: too young, too unstable, child needs permanency with the foster family. The removal paperwork noted concerning similarities between Alexis's case and mine, including the same case consultant, Maurice Blackwell. Same fee, $15,000. On Friday, exactly 1 week after I'd found that box, I got a call from a CPS supervisor named Angela Flores. She wanted to meet with me, with Ethan present, to address the failures in my case. We met at Jennifer's office. Angela was in her 50s, professional but tired, with the look of someone who'd seen too much and apologized for too little. "Dylan," she said, "I owe you an apology on behalf of the system that was supposed to protect you. We failed. Multiple points of failure. Your caseworker, the placement review process, the oversight that should have caught the red flags. I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else." She laid out the changes being implemented. Mandatory review of all cases where biological relatives had expressed interest in custody, investigation of any payments beyond standard foster care reimbursements, direct oversight of cases involving Maurice Blackwell or any other placement consultants, and a new protocol requiring foster families to document all communication attempts from biological relatives. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to give me back 2 years. But it was something. The investigation expanded over the next month. Jennifer filed civil suits against the Donovans, Maurice Blackwell, and CPS for negligence and emotional damages. The local news picked up the story. Foster system corruption exposed by Teens Discovery ran on 3 different channels. Reporters camped outside the Donovans' house. Blackwell's office was raided by federal agents investigating wire fraud and conspiracy charges. I didn't do interviews. I didn't want to be the face of a scandal. But Ethan did, speaking calmly and professionally about systemic issues, about biological families being shut out of children's lives, about the need for reform. The interview that changed everything aired on a Sunday night. Ethan sat across from a local investigative journalist named Rebecca Thornton, who'd been following the story since it broke. "You tried for 2 years to reach your brother," she said. "You sent letters, made calls, hired a lawyer. What kept you going when the system kept telling you no?" Ethan's voice was steady but strained. "He's my brother. That's not something you give up on. Our parents raised us to take care of each other, and I wasn't going to let their death erase that. I knew Dylan was out there, probably being told I didn't want him, probably grieving alone. I couldn't stop trying, even when every door slammed in my face. What do you want people to know about cases like yours? That biological families aren't the enemy. We're not automatically unfit because we're young or grieving or starting careers. The system should be helping us stay together, not making it easier for strangers to cut us apart. And when foster parents pay consultants to help them block family reunification, that's not love. That's ownership. We need to recognize the difference." The interview went viral. Within 48 hours, it had 3 million views. Comments flooded in from other families who'd experienced similar situations or siblings blocked from contact, parents shut out of their children's lives, extended family told their grief made them unsuitable guardians. The story became national news. CPS agencies across the country started reviewing their placement protocols. Lawmakers introduced bills requiring oversight of foster-to-adopt cases. And Maurice Blackwell's client list was subpoenaed. Turns out, he'd been running this operation for 14 years. 47 families identified so far, all fitting the same pattern. Failed adoptions or IVF, older couples desperate for children, matched with foster kids who had biological relatives trying to maintain contact. Blackwell's cut was $15,000 to $20,000 per placement. The foster families paid for his consultation services, and he'd coach them on legal language, documentation strategies, how to position biological relatives as threats to the child's stability. Most of the families probably didn't realize what they were participating in. They'd convinced themselves they were providing better homes, more resources, more love. But the outcome was the same. Children severed from their families, biological relatives blocked from contact, identity systematically erased. The custody hearing happened 6 weeks after I left the Donovans' house. It was almost anticlimactic. Ethan presented his case: stable employment, suitable housing, emotional capacity, documented efforts to maintain contact. Jennifer presented the evidence of blocked communication and fraudulent placement practices. The Donovans' lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Catherine Frost, tried to argue that their actions came from a place of love, that they genuinely believed they were acting in my best interest, that the adoption petition was about providing permanency rather than possession. She presented character witnesses, neighbors, colleagues, families whose children the Donovans had fostered successfully. All of them described the Donovans as devoted, selfless, the kind of people who opened their home and hearts to damaged children. Jennifer's cross-examination was surgical. "Mrs. Donovan, how many letters did you receive from Ethan Reeves over the course of Dylan's placement?" "I don't recall the exact number." 23. All marked return to sender. "Did Dylan ever see any of these letters?" "No." "Why not?" "We felt contact with his brother during the adjustment period would be destabilizing." "Did you consult with Dylan's therapist before making that decision?" "Not formally, no." "Did you ask Dylan what he wanted?" Silence. "Mrs. Donovan, did you ask Dylan if he wanted to communicate with his brother?" "We felt we knew what was best, That's not what I asked." The judge, a woman named Lorraine Kemp, 30 years on the family court bench, listened to 20 minutes of argument and then asked me a single question. "Dylan, where do you want to live?" I looked at Ethan, sitting straight-backed and nervous in a suit he'd probably bought specifically for this hearing. Then I looked at the Donovans, both of them older and smaller than I remembered, Carolyn crying again, Richard's face blank. "With my brother," I said. "I want to live with my family." Judge Kemp nodded once. "Custody is granted to Ethan Reeves, effective immediately. This court finds that the previous placement was obtained through misrepresentation and that reunification with biological family is in the child's best interest. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, you are permanently barred from fostering in this state. Furthermore, this court is referring this case to the State Attorney General for potential criminal investigation. We're adjourned." The criminal investigation took 9 months. Maurice Blackwell was charged with 43 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and operating an unlicensed adoption agency. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial, received 8 years in prison, and agreed to cooperate in identifying all families he'd worked with. 14 foster families faced civil suits from biological relatives seeking damages. The Donovans were among them. Linda Nguyen lost her license and faced censure from the state for failing to adequately investigate Ethan's requests for information. Dr. Raymond Cross, the therapist, was investigated for falsifying therapy notes to support the Donovans' adoption petition. He lost his license for ethical violations. 3 months after the custody hearing, I was sitting in the DMV waiting to take my driver's test. Ethan had been teaching me to drive in his sedan, patient through all my jerky stops and nervous lane changes. I was using my parents' old car. Ethan had kept it in storage all this time, maintained it, waiting for the day I'd be ready to drive it. It was a 2004 Toyota Camry, nothing special, but it was theirs, mine now. When I passed the test, Ethan was waiting in the lobby with flowers, sunflowers, my mom's favorites, though I'd never told him I remembered that. "Proud of you," he said, crushing me in a hug that had become familiar again over the last few months. We went to our parents' grave afterward, the first time I'd been back since the funeral. Ethan had been visiting weekly for 2 years. There were fresh flowers on the headstone, which he admitted he'd just put there that morning. "I told them about you every time," he said quietly. "All the things you were missing, all the ways I was trying to get you back. I think they'd be proud of how you handled everything." The civil suit against the Donovans settled 6 months later. Jennifer had sued for damages related to emotional distress, loss of familial relationships, and negligent infliction of emotional harm. The Donovans' insurance company settled for $340,000 to avoid trial. Jennifer took a third for her fees, worth every penny, and the rest went into a trust for my education and future. Blood money, Ethan called it, but money that would ensure I never had to worry about college tuition or starting my adult life in debt. The Donovans sold their house and moved to different states, divorcing shortly after. I heard Carolyn tried to continue counseling work, but couldn't find employment after the case became public. Richard disappeared entirely from public view. I felt nothing when I heard. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness where they used to occupy space in my head. I'm 18 now, legally an adult, though I still feel like I'm figuring out what that means. I finished high school through online classes, got accepted to the same university where Ethan works about studying computer science, like him. We live in the same apartment, though he's already talking about getting a bigger place when I'm ready. The therapist I see now, a woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, who specializes in foster care trauma, says I'm processing remarkably well considering what I went through. She says resilience isn't about not being hurt. It's about rebuilding after damage. I'm learning to do that. Alexis, the 13-year-old who was removed from the Donovans after me, is living with her sister Brianna now. They invited Ethan and me to dinner last month, wanted to thank us for bringing everything to light. Alexis is thriving, top of her class, joined the debate team, talks about becoming a lawyer someday. Brianna cried when she told us how close she came to giving up on getting custody, how the system made her feel like she was the problem. You saved her, she said to me. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't save anyone. I just found a box and refused to pretend I hadn't. Jennifer keeps in touch, updates us on other cases she's working on using the precedent from ours. The laws haven't changed as much as she'd hoped. Systemic reform moves slowly, but some progress is being made. The oversight requirements are helping. Biological families have more recourse now when they're being blocked. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. I think about the Donovans sometimes. I wonder if they really believed they were helping me, or if they knew all along what they were doing. I wonder if Carolyn still cries about losing me, or if she's convinced herself I'm better off with Ethan. I wonder if Richard ever looks at that box in his closet, if he kept it, and feels guilty. Mostly, though, I don't wonder. I can't give them that space in my head anymore. They took 2 years of my life, 2 years I should have spent with my brother, rebuilding after losing our parents. They can't have any more time than that. Last week, Ethan and I went through our parents' wedding album together. Really looked at it, not just flipping through. He told me stories about each photo, who the people were, what had happened that day, the speech our dad's best friend had given that made everyone cry. I'd been too young to remember any of it, but listening to Ethan talk, I could almost see it. Almost feel connected to that version of our family, the one that existed before everything fell apart. You know what kills me? Ethan said, staring at a photo of our parents dancing. You were so young when they died. You're going to forget them eventually, and I won't. I'll remember, and you'll have to rely on my memories. I looked at him then, at my brother who'd fought for 2 years to get me back, who'd kept playlists and storage units and weekly grave visits like acts of faith. That's not the worst thing, I said. Remembering together, sharing the memories you have, that's not forgetting. That's keeping them alive. He cried then, for the first time since the night he picked me up from the Donovans' house. I let him, because sometimes you need to break down to finish healing. And we were healing, both of us, slowly. Building a life that honored the past without being trapped by it. Our parents were gone. 2 years were lost. But we had this. Each other. The truth. A future we were building together. The Donovans tried to erase my past. They failed. Not because I fought them, though I did, but because the past isn't something you can box up and hide behind false walls. It lives in the people who remember, who refuse to let go, who keep fighting even when the system says stop. My brother did that for me. Kept me real when they were trying to make me someone else. That's what family does. The real kind. The kind that doesn't need adoption papers or legal documents to prove it exists. The kind that just is, deep and permanent and unbreakable, even when someone spends 2 years trying to erase it. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.